Thank you for tuning in with me this week on Mommy Rush. Here's what we have in store for you. Hi, I am Rochelle and welcome to Mommy Rush. So we spoke last week about cup and spoon, and I mentioned to you that we had used cup and spoon for the first week, and then we started using a pipette until we discovered the squeeze spoon on Amazon, and that we started using, and we used it for the next 6 weeks. Now once we were finished with that, we realized there was a point, because it doesn't hold more than, I believe it was 4 ounces at the time. So when the girls got to a little over 2 months, they would have been anticipating far more food. They'd be feeding more aggressively. They were a bit stronger now, so they still preferred, over everything else, they preferred the breast. So this episode is called Breast is Best. I always planned to breastfeed, so let me put that caveat out there. I planned to breastfeed for a while, then switch to formula until I began my price hunt. The moment I began that price hunt and I realized the cost for baby formula, my mind was automatically changed, because breastfeeding and breast milk is way cheaper than formula. Nobody told me that formula was just so expensive, and the pressure was real. My lowest moments as a mom were the points when I felt like this serious amount of mom guilt, and I was near feeling a little bit depressed. My feelings of inadequacy, all of that were surrounding breastfeeding and what was best for the baby. What could I manage? I put a great deal of pressure on myself when it came to breastfeeding. From day one, I had been feeling like I felt like a tennis player, feeling all this advice on breastfeeding. Man, I mean, if I was a cricketer, I would have been a very good cricketer, because I had to be catching all those balls. Breastfeed only for 2 months, breastfeed for 3 months, no, breastfeed for a year, breastfeed for 6 months, you need to latch this way, you need to do. There was so much overwhelming advice. And for those women who said, don't bother with the breastfeeding, you're going to allow the baby to mash up your body, start breastfeeding early, or if you don't do that, your breast will sag. Then there were those who said, breastfeeding is important for the bonding with your baby. Best to breastfeed for the first year, or the child will grow very detached and uncaring. I mean, I heard don't breastfeed, breast is best. No, 0 to 2 years. Yes, breastfeed for 0 to 2 years. All this advice was just overwhelming, and I had it up to here. Here. The advice meant very little to me, especially since there was the tale of two cities going on in my own family, where on one side, one set of relatives were breast is best advocates, and on the other side you had the formula forever facilitators. Like, okay, whatever you want to do, but you can feed the baby formula forever. Like, it really isn't that serious. Then among friends and sympathizers, you had both schools of thought. There was the repeated sentiment, Rochelle, what are you going to do? It's twins, you're not going to ever produce enough milk to feed them, so you should think about formula. Okay. So I have no foolproof statement on any of these. So what I'll tell you is what I did. First thing I did was I prayed about it. Yeah, go figure. That's my approach to most things. I hopped onto the prayer line, and I started praying first that my supply would come in, and my supply would be even more than the girls needed. And now with all this noise behind me, and my girls here finally, so they were here now, and the breast versus the formula test actually began. And in the hospital, 90% of the nurses were pretty supportive. I gave birth at the university hospital and I'd go there again. I really had a wonderful experience and the nurses were extremely supportive. I stepped out of the delivery room, and as soon as the anesthesia wore off, or it wasn't even worn off fully, the attending nurse was stuffing my nipple into one of the baby's open mouth. Pain like I never expected. Nobody tells you about it. Getting the girls to latch wasn't easy. Then one would latch properly, as I mentioned to you before, and then it took about 3.5 weeks for them both to get the hang of the whole, like really get the hang of breastfeeding. So they would not be sucking and then pausing and sleeping on my breast, none of that, because the discomfort I found later on was really from how I was sitting when I was breastfeeding. So I wasn't sitting upright and I wasn't sitting comfortably when I was breastfeeding, and I felt fine about my breastfeeding technique. And while at the university hospital, there were about 2 nurses that made me feel like I was a superstar, you know. The sister heading the ward did it too. Like they would be commending me, and not just me, Rochelle, but myself and other moms on the ward. I love those nurses. But there were others there. Not the whole team, like two single solitary nurses. Those nurses kind of ruined my high. Mother, you need to wake up. Mother, you need to feed your baby. Mother, you need to try harder. Mother, wake up your baby and feed them. Yeah, but as I said, in total, I probably came in contact with about 20 nurses, and that was just 2 out of the 20 that made me feel a little bit inadequate. But luckily, right after, you had a dozen other nurses that would come in and say, oh, don't worry about it, you're doing a good job, your babies are fine, your babies are cute. And that's exactly what you want to hear as a mom. During this time, I was still post-op with severe pain because I did a C-section, and it was me breastfeeding 2 babies. And did I mention also that not because the babies came out means that whole matter of nausea and vomiting that I had during pregnancy did not come to an end. So I was still having to contend with that, even though I had that severe pain from a C-section that I was still recovering from. At the time, I was not in a position to breastfeed both girls simultaneously because I wasn't an expert at it yet, and I honestly felt like I was a terrible mother. So if I had to have one baby waiting to be breastfed because I was still feeding and burping the other one, I really felt awful. It was not until Nurse Brian on the maternity, on the antenatal, is it no, postnatal ward, showed up, and she made my load feel so much lighter. She was just, as I said to you, there were a lot of nurses and doctors there who were very good to me, but Nurse Brian at UE was just amazing. She really made me feel like, okay, you're doing a good job. And I can recall her because she was almost like a mother to me on the ward. After about 2 nights of no sleep, she and the other nurses came, and they came to my room and said, you know, we're gonna help you feed the twins tonight, go and sleep. And that's the moment I knew, okay, you didn't have to choose one or the other. You didn't have to choose formula or breast milk. You could use breast milk to supplement at times. And I said, no man, you can sleep. We're gonna breastfeed them tonight. We're gonna feed them a little formula, and then you'll be back at it tomorrow morning. Because at this stage, I hadn't slept for 2 nights. I hadn't slept since coming out of surgery, and that was my first full night's rest since I hit my 2nd trimester. Actually, yeah, that was my first full 8-hour night sleep, and it felt good. that's when my nausea actually stopped and subsided. And that morning they helped me get the whole hang of breastfeeding comfortably, and they did a tutorial on how to care for your baby, how to bathe my babies and all of those things. And they reminded me, as did my mom and also my mother-in-law, that it was not meant to be an overnight success story. I wasn't going to have the babies yesterday and then today, boom, I'm a superstar mother. Yeah. It wasn't going to be like that. It took time to get a rhythm going, and just as I was learning, the girls were learning too. And it would take time for me to get comfortable and for the girls to get comfortable as well. So this breastfeeding journey is now going very well. I can report that my milk production is awesome and on point, right up until I took the girls to do their first visit or first trip to the pediatrician, because they were born 2 weeks premature. So weight gain was something critical, and they were both a little bit underweight. So that's when we had to do, we stopped on-demand feeding, did feeding every 2 hours, then we moved to every 3 hours, and we had a combination of formula and breast milk, mainly because using while I did pump and express milk, my breast milk the supply wouldn't be as much if I hadn't gotten at least 3 to 4 hours of sleep before feeding them or before pumping. So we used formula to supplement sometimes, and I got a lot of help. My mom was around, my mother-in-law was around, and my husband was like, yeah, he was Superman throughout this whole process. I wasn't happy that we had to incorporate formula at first, but I decided to just get in that boat and row, because this was the reality. I couldn't be up all day, all night. That really never made any sense. And as I mentioned to you, my milk would take 4 to 5 hours to come in on a cycle, and the girls were feeding every 2 to 3 hours. It wasn't sustainable for me. So the formula was used as a supplement to my breast milk. There were low days. Also, I mentioned already, there were still days when I felt inadequate, but then there were days like I felt like a real superstar, a real general. It was not until I prayed and I spoke to God, I spoke to my moms, and I read about power pumping, and my whole mood and outlook and mindset changed. As I abandoned that defeatist mentality, like every day, okay, how much can I pump now? How much can I pump now? So I was more relaxed in my approach, because I started power pumping. And with power pumping, I also added in drinking way more water and soursop juice. Miracle juice, people. Soursop juice. So getting my 4 to 6 hours of sleep, pumping after every feeding. So every time I'd feed both girls on both breasts at the same time, so that my milk supply would come in on both breasts equally at the same time. And even after feeding, doing that feeding for both girls at the same time, drinking a tall glass of soursop juice before feeding, then after feeding, then I'd pump. Their weight just shot up, and our need for formula as a support was basically no more. We'd keep it on hand in case of an emergency, or in case I wanted to take 8 hours of sleep, then and with all of that, if I would feed them, as I mentioned to you, water and soursop juice before feeding them, water and soursop juice after feeding them, I would still be able to pump an additional 10 ounces even after they've both been fully fed. And if they were fully fed, they would be having about 8 or 10 ounces from me. So I'd still be able to churn out 10 ounces post-feeding or pre-breastfeeding. It didn't matter. No, at first I felt like that wasn't enough. And then when I spoke to some of my other mom mates, I realized that the average woman is able to pump 4 to 5 ounces after they've done breastfeeding. And I was feeding 2 babies who were well fed, and I was still able to pump out 10 ounces after that. So I felt like a superstar now, because yeah, I was being a bit hard on myself. It wasn't always like that. The type of breast pump I used, I think, makes the difference, because the pumps I was using before, and I won't tell you those brands, they weren't emptying my breasts. But when I started using the Lancino brand, it's honestly the best ever. I've tried like 4 other breast pumps before Lancino, and Lancino would be able to empty my breast fully. So I didn't have any, I had issues of engorgement before, didn't have any issues of engorgement or clogged milk ducts at all. Yeah, so all of that with prayer made a huge difference. So let me tell you a little bit about power pumping, because I spoke about that earlier. So the average mom, as I mentioned, pumps 4 to 5 ounces of breast milk in one session. In one session, I'm able to pump 10 ounces per feeding. And when I say 10 ounces, it's not it's total for both breasts. So each breast would give me 5 or 4 ounces, and the other one would make up for the balance, while other moms, after breastfeeding, they'd be pumping out just 4 to 5 ounces total from both breasts, right? So how power pumping works is that, tell you about the drinking water, soursop juice at the beginning, then I'd pump for about 20 minutes straight, then I'd have another drink, wait 10 minutes, then pump again for 10 minutes, then I'd pause for 10, have something to drink again, then pump for another 10. And I do this activity for about 6 times during the day, and I did that for quite some time. So just to recap, I want to share some of the things that made a difference in terms of my whole breastfeeding journey and the feeding cycles. So it's a combination of different things, but chief among them, as I said to you, is prayer works, and don't be too hard on yourself. First off, rest is crucial. Sleeping at least 6 hours or more, you're able to get up to, I was able to get up to 16 ounces for my next pumping session. So try to get as much rest as you can. I think my milk supply would probably be more than the normal singleton mom, because I'm pregnant with multiples. Using the right kind of breast pump is key. This is tip number 2. The other 3 breast pumps I had could not hold a candle to the Lancino. My Lancino electronic pump is everything to me, and I use it for about 15 to 20 minutes on average, minimum 4 times per day, and then at night I'd use it for about 30 minutes. At night, that would be probably about midnight, or I'd use it at 4 in the morning for that 30 minutes. Drinking water, eating fruits, it's a lot of mangoes, drinking lots and lots of soursop juice and coconut water as well made a huge difference. And I would have about 1 to 3 cups of soursop juice during the power pumping sessions, and I'd also make sure I had some coconut water after breastfeeding. I also drank about 2 glasses of water during my pumping sessions or after. And then power pumping, I mentioned about power pumping. I tried to power pump at least 1 or 2 times for the week, just to keep my supply in check. It's almost like going to the gym on a regular basis, and it helped keep the milk ducts flowing. Even when nothing was coming out, I'd still continue my power pumping session. And to power pump, as I mentioned, a glass of soursop juice and a full bottle of water close by, and I'd pump for 20 minutes first, then rest for 10 to 15, then have a drink, then pump for another 10 minutes, rest, have a drink, and just repeat the cycle for about 2 to 3 rounds. And sometime I end the last cycle by just breastfeeding the girls. So I do this before their scheduled feeding time. So my journey may not be anything like yours, but I'm hoping that you can learn from the tools and tips and tricks. And there are other persons that have other bits of advice about breastfeeding. I recently heard one person was telling me that when she was a new mom, she drank beer. Some Germans recommended that she drink beer to get her milk supply flowing, and apparently it worked. I'm not a beer drinker, so I don't see myself doing that at all. But the average breastfeeding mom produces 25 to 35 ounces of milk per day. My girls, an actual average newborn multiples from 0 to 6 months will consume approximately 25 ounces of milk per day. And right now I'm at a stage where I'm producing 45 to 60 ounces per day. Yes, 60 ounces of breast milk daily on average, anywhere between 45 and 60 ounces. Be warned, however, that my pumping process does have its downside, because I pump on a schedule and I power pump on a schedule as well. My breasts fill up because they don't care about whether I'm at work or out shopping or at the grocery store or at the market. They will fill up and they will ache because of how rapidly, or the volume at which they fill up, because I pump on a schedule. So this means that I can be on the road or at the bank or just in the ladies' room, and I have to pump then and there. The next thing I should mention, with that being said, is I still keep formula in the house. We use Similac, and I found that it is probably the easiest on the tummy for the girls, and it's closest to breast milk in my estimation. And we use it to help top up my milk supply if I have a low supply or a busy day, where my volume is not what is customary, so we have an abnormal or unusual day. I am able to supply food to my girls, and they absolutely love mommy time when we bond over the breast, and they still enjoy and feel cared for, no less cared for, when I am feeding them from a bottle with expressed breast milk or a little bit of formula. So don't be so hard on yourself, moms out there. This is my advice to you from my journey, and I look forward to sharing my next set of stories and tales with you. If there's anything that I've shared and you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you're not familiar with any of the items or products that I've mentioned, this is just season 1, so I am happy to go into more detail and answer your questions in a few weeks. Just post them below, and I look forward to sharing stories with you as well from my mom mates on their pregnancy